Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to detect and prevent Same Day BEC ACH fraud. This webinar is the first part of a webinar series on how to detect fraud, ACH fraud with machine learning and behavioral analytics. I will do the introduction of our speakers for today's webinar. So Chris Ferrer, Product Manager at Guardian Analytics, working on ACH real-time fraud detection. Myself, Vice President of Product Management. I will be the moderator for this webinar and participate to the QA session. I come from Oracle, where I led the Big Data Security Predictive Analytics as the Vice President of Product Management. Some quick housekeeping. You can answer questions in the question box. We will address them either live and or by email. This webinar is recorded, and you will receive a URL link that will notify you about where to listen and watch the webinar. Please rate and suggest the content to improve our webinar series on ACH fraud detection with machine learning and behavioral analytics. So a quick glance at Guardian before stepping into the topic itself. We are protecting payment activities of about 450 financial institutions. We have about 40 million commercial and retail account holders, and in terms of volume of banking activities, we are protecting about 5 billion of them. The core of our specialty is machine learning and behavioral analytics approach to fraud prevention. We collect continuously user data from devices as well as user activities. We establish baseline on their activities, and any deviator detected by our algorithm will be flagged so that you have a risk-based approach to any kind of action, and you can mitigate any fraudulent activity and risk. This risk-based approach leads to fewer false positives, a higher fraud capture rate, and improved alert operation efficiency. A little bit of numbers right now into 2018 in terms of volume of banking activities. We are protecting from fraud. We are clearly leader in ACH. About over 250 million ACH transactions are going through our system. Over 10 million wire transactions and about 20 million online banking sessions and 10 million online mobile sessions. Now, why does it matter? Well, first off, the FBI has alerted this year that the BEC, so Business Email Compromise, and EAC, which is the email account compromise, more individual driven, were rising. The total U.S. victim between 2013 and 2016 was about 22,000, and the total U.S. exposed dollar loss was above 1.5 billion. Now, we have observed through our own fraud desk that the BEC scam, Business Email Compromise scam, were mainly on wire before, but we are observing a surge in BEC Same Day ACH in 2017. Now, this, as you may know, is coinciding with the phase 2 of NACHA Same Day phases. In September 15, payout and collect payment now are same-day driven. As you may know, it started in September 23rd, 2016. It was mostly for payout that you could do same day, but now since September 15, 2017, payout and collect payments on same-day ACH are being activated. And we have observed a surge. Well, now what does it mean? Well, first off, NACHA itself has reported an increase by 51% in ACH debit and credit transaction, which is like I told you, payout and collect payments, month over month, which adds up to about $87 billion transferred. And March 16, 2018, so about 30 days from now, a little bit less, receiver depository financial institution will be mandated to make funds available by 5 p.m. In other words, the payee is expected to have his fund the same day, and this is before the cutoff window of the settlement to the ACH operator, the Fed, for example, here, which is a big change compared to basically non-same day ACH. And let me characterize the problem or the challenges with doing a before and after same day ACH compare contrast. This is a little diagram that shows you before same day ACH, the participant you would have in a same day ACH transaction. You would have the originator, in this case a fraudster posing as the originator. You would have the ODFI, so the originator, depository financial institution, that would actually accept the batch submission here. And by the way, I forgot to mention, this is a BEC scam. So the first line of defense that you have, either by controlling, verifying the banks, is actually breach. In the case of BEC, the fraudster posing as an originator is actually instructing fraudulent transaction to the bank, to the ODFI bank. And through that, he will basically wait for the funds to be received. Now, the situation is before same day ACH, there's a minimum 2 days to block that ACH fraudulent transaction. One is before the settlement date that you could, for example, run fraud detection tools right here. But even within the settlement and after, if the ACH is being rejected, for example, the receiver, the victim start to say, why have I been debited for $24K? I don't know this recipient. You have at least 2 days to block it, and the reality is you could have more than 2 weeks because the banks have about 15 days to basically dispute the ACH, and you have at least another 2 weeks to basically block the ACH. So for the fraudster, this is not a very good deal. I mean, those transactions are pretty long to close and to get the money out. So this is not very interesting. Now, what are the main change? Let's take a look at same day ACH, and especially past March 18th. As you can see here, it is a little clock that I put, and in the case of same day ACH, there's two clearing windows, morning and afternoon. We're not going to get into the details of it, but just get an example of a morning submission. The settlement date is settlement time is 10:30 a.m. In other words, remember, past March 13, the payee is expecting to get the funds in the same day, actually exactly at 5 p.m. So what happens is, as the originator is sending his BAC a scam, breaching the first line of defense, the ODFI has only really 2 hours to go about analyzing the fraudulent transaction, and before it settles, so that it blocks it before the settlement. And this is a big issue because, as you can see, there's not a lot of time for fraud analysts to detect what's going on. So why Guardian Analytics? And using the same diagram, let me show you why our unique features of machine learning behavior analytics does help. Now, as you can see here, what we do is we fully automate a risk-based approach to all the ACH. So we are analyzing all the ACH batch, and you may receive thousands of them in a day. And as soon as it is continuous. So while those batches are arriving, you can see this orange box. We rescore all the ACH transactions. We would display highly fraudulent transaction alerts, and we run policy for you to either block them or not. And this is done automatically. And as this has been done automatically, what's really happened when you think about the time in the day of a fraud analyst, you're actually regaining from 12 a.m., human time, 12 a.m. to 9 a.m., all those ACH batches are being analyzed without having you to be there. And when your team comes in the morning, let's say 9 a.m., what he can do between the cutoff window of the settlement at 10:30, he can basically analyze only the batches that has been held and rejected by the system itself, as you can see here, knowing that all the ones that are cleared are being cleared automatically and goes to the ODFI for Fed submission. So this is a big, big win for you in terms of regaining time and focus on what matters the most, which is basically ACH batches that are being held automatically by the system itself, either because the risk score was too high or rejected, and you would analyze only those. So now I'm going to hand it over to Chris. Chris would dissect the Same Day ACH debit fraud and explain to you how the system worked. Chris?
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. So first, let's look at how a fraudster kind of get in their head and understand how they go about executing these BEC frauds. So first, my kind of handy tool, or really easily accessible tool, is Google. I can easily use some search terms like chief financial officer or specific kinds of executives and find their email address. So in this instance here, I can see we found the CFO or vice chancellor of Berkeley, as well as other important CFOs at various companies that I can now easily target for BEC fraud. In addition to that, I can verify these email addresses through a very handy tool called the Hunter. And so this is being kind of shown to us by Black Hat, a leading research organization, of some of the tools that fraudsters can easily implement and use in order to ensure that they're targeting the right individuals, they're not wasting their time, and even automate this through API workflows. Furthermore, not just stopping at the email address, I can easily fingerprint my victims. So I can look at and link to the various social platforms that they're utilizing, from Twitter to GitHub to Facebook, so that I can better understand the potential victim, especially looking at, say, Twitter, where they may be traveling, as this makes it a lot easier for me to, initiate a business email compromise and ask for a suspicious ACH transaction from someone in the finance department as I'm not at my desk, so they can't easily kind of get a hold of me. And looking at the kind of timeline that I, as a fraudster, might go through after I've gotten through that first line of defense and kind of, succeeded in that social engineering and compromising a CFO or another executive's account, I can easily enact these BEC instructions, sending emails to the finance department, contacting various individuals that can allow me to, initiate these suspicious batches over here, in the morning, say for the first window of ACH, and have that originating account debited and receive those funds by lunchtime. And I can easily drain accounts with large sums of money multiple times in a day, which really kind of highlights the issue that Same Day ACH is posing for a lot of financial institutions, and to some extent kind of mirroring the quickness that one can get through wire fraud. So now let's kind of dive in and how we go about detecting Same Day ACH BEC fraud with behavior analytics. So here we see the Guardian Analytics UI, and as an analyst, what really is kind of important here is I can see who the company is, I can see the risk factors that are most important to me. So what are those attributes or those signals from these transactions that could be potentially risky? And so right here we see early warning signs that are retained in our behavior analytics model, demonstrating to me that this account holder doesn't typically make transactions with new recipients. And so we see a significant amount of time pass by, December, November, all the way here into February, where we see a new recipient again. And so what this shows me is that this is very atypical for this account, and that this requires or should kind of promote me to look at this more in depth. We also see a transaction amount change. And so many times we'll see fraudsters really try to emulate and try to stay in line with the typical batch amounts or transaction amounts that originators are processing. However, we see a little bit of a slip up from a fraudster here, and we can kind of, this really helps me focus in on these anomalous activities. So taking a second example, of a potential or a confirmed actually BEC fraud, we again see early warning signs of new recipients. So we see it happen, once here, and we see it kind of again here in this red circular box, which is the actual instance of fraud. And so the difference we're seeing between these earlier instances is that this account holder was legitimately sending transactions or sending money to businesses. However, we see a change in this new recipient to an individual. We also see a change in the set code where this account holder typically was sending transactions through CCD. However, now we see that change to PPD. So now that we've kind of seen some of the signals that we can see in Guardian Analytics and kind of how we really focus in on the specific instances of fraud rather than kind of belaboring, say, superfluous alerts that we don't really need to look at that are, the typical behavior of our customers, what do we do next? So with Guardian Analytics, you can easily, or I can easily, create a case and look and generate the information that's necessary for my team to help me or for me to kind of keep track of the most important facets of this suspicious activity. So here I see the amount at risk, which is about $76,000. I see the company or the category of fraud. So this is a suspicious activity, right? And so as I'm going through this case and investigating, I can keep track of the various notes from investigating to working with my ACH team to retrieve these funds once we've kind of, verified with the customer that this wasn't a transaction that they initiated, or if it was, get to the bottom of what happened here. So in this instance, we see that there was a spoofed email address, and someone in, say, the finance department initiated this transaction, thinking that it was coming from a legitimate request from an executive. So here we can kind of keep track of the case and make sure that we have the transparency for the rest of our team, that my manager can come in and see, what my process was, as well as keeping track of this information for auditors when we need to kind of show them the confirmed fraud that we've seen. So we've talked about some of the key tools that Guardian Analytics provides for analysts, from automating and making the operational process a little bit more efficient with sending those non-risky transactions straight onto the Fed and allowing me to really see the behavior of my customers and really tell the story. But as a manager, what do I need? What are the tools that I need to investigate and analyze ACH fraud as well as other types of fraud? And so at Guardian Analytics, we have a new suite of tools called Fraud Analytics, where as a manager, I can come in here and blend internal and third-party data sets so that I can get really rich insights around the types of fraud that we're seeing, around the fraud exposure that we have, as well as utilizing any type of business intelligence tool that I kind of use in my organization internally currently through an OData API that gives me incredible flexibility in the time of day that I want to receive data, as well as, again, the kind of BI framework that I want to utilize. So kind of looking at some of these, really helpful executive level dashboards that I can utilize, I can see the operational status of my organization, seeing how much suspicious activity are we seeing, and are my resources allocated in the best way to ensure that we're reducing the amount of risk exposure, fraud exposure that we have. In addition to that, really seeing trends around, say, the types of fraud we're seeing, the volume of really suspicious alerts, the types of cases we are creating, and the efficiency and kind of how great my team is working at really reducing the fraud exposure that we have, but really keeping a pulse on what is my operational status and making it really easy for me to explain to leadership as well as auditors the program that we have in place, as well as the tools and kind of efficiency that we're leveraging in fighting fraud. And so it's shareable, and you can also utilize various channels. So, whether you just are really focusing on ACH fraud or you're looking at mobile, business, wire fraud, you can kind of get that omni-channel view in one pane of glass and really see across channels what kind of fraud and alerts you're seeing. similarly, I can focus in on specific analysts and see how they're doing, especially as we're onboarding new analysts. I want to ensure that they have the tools necessary to succeed. And I can really see who are some of, say, our high flyers so that I can ensure that they have people to rely upon to really kind of get up to speed as we're ensuring that we're fighting fraud as efficiently as possible. And so kind of with these comprehensive out-of-the-box dashboards, this kind of lists out here the types of reports that kind of come out of the box, but there's a lot of flexibility with this tool that allows you to create new sorts of insights from case to close to other sorts of insights through data blending. So here we see alert status, the confirmed fraud, high and medium risk alerts, and some really juicy, important reports for me to understand what's going on. So today is our first part in our ACH series, and so here we have Same Day ACH. But we have many upcoming and exciting kind of deep dives into different types of ACH fraud. We have part 2 coming up on May 8th, looking at ACH small transaction fraud, as well as part 3 on August 28th, looking at kiting fraud, and our 4th and final in the series around payroll fraud on November 6th. And we have some content for you to really enjoy around learning more about fraud analytics and fraud cockpit, which kind of walks you through some of the reports that we talked about today and some of the opportunities that you have around kind of gaining further insights. We also have other tools and content around detecting BEC fraud, meeting the new submission windows with the crunch time of Same Day ACH.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. We're now into the Q&A session. We have actually a series of questions coming from the audience. Let me start with the first one. Since new recipients and payee edits are the most prevalent BEC fraud, should I review all the transactions with these risk factors? What sort of control do I have?
So one of the nice things with Guardian Analytics is that we look at the behavior of your customers over time. And so you may have a customer that has a lot of new recipients, say a construction company that works on, say, a contracting basis with many different contractors. So having new recipients may not be risky for them. It's something that they typically do. And rather than, say, stopping many of their transactions or giving them a call all of the time, what we'll do is we'll learn this behavior and be able to tell you whether this is in line with their past behavior. So we'll really kind of bring to the fore for you those risk factors that are actually anomalous given the past behavior of your customers. And you also have the flexibility to, say, enact policies to look at, say, specific types of risk factors that might be kind of important to you, whether that is, say, some suspicious IP addresses that you know to watch, or, say, payee edit, where you really want to focus in on this type of risk factor, as it's not very often that someone has the same account name while changing the account number. So it's kind of a yes and no answer, but with Guardian Analytics, it really helps you kind of review the most important transactions rather than every transaction.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We have another question from the audience. Can these tools, can the same Guardian Analytics fraud analytic tools be used for detection with other banking products? And actually, there's an example with mobile remote deposit capture. Let me take that one, Chris. So as you can see here, this is an ACH case scenario. Actually, the same machine learning behavior analytics methods and probabilistic models are being used for online banking and mobile banking, so more in the digital banking space. We have actually a webinars coming in about, I think, 8 days just on that. But yes, we're using the same methods to detect online and mobile banking fraud. And we have ways of connecting with the mobile and online banking platform to do a detect and response method, so that we can apply a risk-based scoring to all kind of online and mobile sessions, so that the backend platform can decide to reject, accept, or hold the transaction. There's another series of questions. Yes. When will we see examples of the Guardian Analytics platform using machine learning? All I see is detection with no learning of the models. I see rule-based detection, reporting, and dashboards. So actually, there's no rule-based. What you are seeing here is the outcome of the machine learning models. We have actually another webinar series just on machine learning models to give you the framework of how it works. But to summarize, our machine learning models is an unsupervised model, so we don't need to know the fraud. It detects itself and learns by itself, and then the model self-learn. There is no rule base. Now, machine learning doesn't mean that you can't have policies. So the risk score that you can see, and not to be confused, in a rule-based system, you have a notion of weight that people tend to call risk score too, but it's the outcome of the rule. So basically, you have to have a rule first and combine the weight to prioritize the rules. In the case of machine learning, everything is risk score. I mean, there's no rules on that. And it's a self-learning mechanism. And we have a policy base so that you can, for example, in the case of ACH, you have thousands of batches coming in. We risk score all of them 100% of the time. But your fraud team wants to highlight some of them, just because when they came up between 9 and 10:30, they know that for, let's say, higher priority on higher, let's say, account volume and risk, you want to detect those situation of, we call it situation of interest, event of interest. You have a policy that can highlight on top of that so that you can go and track them as the machine learning keeps going on the risk scoring part.
And another good example to that is when we were looking, for example, at the BEC fraud, confirmed fraud, we saw a new recipient, right? And so what behavior analytics allows us to do is to see, is this anomalous given their past behavior? And even if it's not anomalous given their past behavior, is there a combination of, say, differences in the set code that's being used, the transaction amount, that would change kind of the risk score? So looking at, these various data points, taking kind of the past in and feeding that into kind of put out a risk score that is determined by the behavior rather than, say, rules that are kind of hard and fast.
Okay, in the same vein, I have a question on how do you train your fraud models? What is your response data? Do you see fraudulent transaction and incorporate them into your development data set? Actually, this is linked to the type of model you're picking, you're choosing. In machine learning, to keep it very simple, you have supervised and unsupervised. In the supervised model, you will need labels. Basically, you need fraud transaction. Otherwise, the system can't even start. In unsupervised, you don't need it. It learns by itself. It trains by itself. So in this particular situation, we don't need fraudulent transaction to get the system going. As soon as the financial institution is giving us the data sets, so basically a series, in our case, ACH batches, for example, we start to learn from them. And of course, there's a historical data set that we're learning, so the size matters. The score timeline matters. But once we learn it, as we go forward, we establish a baseline, and a deviation out of it would be risk scored. Having said that, what happened when you have a confirmed fraud, and actually when you saw from the deck here, when we have a confirmed fraud, we're actually looking at our model, and we are looking at as if to see if the efficiency or the performance of the model is correct. So we're using couple of techniques like lift charts, which is basically an ability, a report, if you wish, an ability to understand how the model behaves and captures the frauds as they come in. I have another question here. What amount of time does it take to implement Guardian? You want to take that one, Chris?
So it really varies on the kind of data set that you might have available. So we like to utilize about 3 months to I think a year of data to really kind of train our model with the kind of unsupervised method that we utilize. So it can take anywhere from, the minimum is usually about 3 months, and we can kind of get you up and running.
Okay. I'm hearing from the audience that we have some quality issue. We're sorry about this. I mean, you will have the copy of the presentation as well as hopefully the recording. We will check the quality. I have a last question here, and we will answer all of them, by the way, by emails. In the slide, I see ACH debit. ACH debit will pull to credit the original account. The earlier slides say ACH debit, but it should really be ACH credit fraud, correct? You want to take that one, Chris? It's explaining the ACH credit debits and the ODFI, RDFI, so that I know it sometimes gets confusing, but.
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, we'll pull credit.
Yes, I think because we have observed same-day ACH debit fraud at Guardian. It doesn't mean we didn't see credit, but we see a surge in debit. But what we're seeing is, from a ODFI standpoint, the fraudster tends to play on that because they can take control over the ODFI, basically the debit account.
Yeah, so a fraudster might, have an account that they've created and initiate, say, a debit where a customer would be, or a vendor would be paying them for, some fake services that they've, done, or else if they were to, say, hack into or, kind of gain access to a specific vendor and then have that vendor credit their fraudulent account. So I think those would be the kind of the two examples of the types of same-day ACH fraud that we've seen.
Okay. We have other questions coming. Will there be any false positive results, and what is the mechanism of validating them and suppressing them? So within the lift charts, so basically lift charts in accuracy and sensitivity model, usually in transaction, we are capturing very well transaction. The algorithm we are using is a Bayesian graphical model. So to keep it simple, we use probability to learn. So the number of false positives is very reduced because we really look at the dependency and put likelihood of the dependency to happen. Now, in case they do happen, what we work with our customer on is we have a fraud desk team that will be basically inspecting, investigating all the fraud losses and understand if they're false positive or false negative. In case they're false negative, there's a full investigation to understand how the fraudster came in and what are the data parameters that he's been using. In most of the time, our system will detect it. And in case we don't, then we are triggering an investigation that will recalibrate the model on the back, either by taking more data elements or basically taking more historical timeline. I think we have answered most of the questions. If they keep coming, we will answer them by email. At this point, I would like to thank you for your attendance. You can contact us at success@guardiananalytics.com. We have other webinar series coming down in ACH itself. There's 3 other webinar series. And I'm inviting you to go to our website to look at all the other webinar series on digital banking and AML. Thank you very much. Goodbye.